All right, here we go. Can't wait to watch SBF get destroyed. When the government says it will begin shortly, I tend to not believe them, but there's no way I'm missing this. So what I expect to see happen here is that scam Bankman-Fried is going to try to weasel his way out of answering any of the questions effectively. So we've seen this happen before. I think you guys also watch CoffeeZilla. He's described and he's interviewed SBF before. SBF does a great job of answering the question without really answering it. So if you come at him but you don't explicitly lead him into the answer that you're looking for, he's going to find his way to weasel out of it. And I think we're going to see a lot of that going on here. We remember when scumbag Vlad got grilled by Congress. He had a tendency to try to eat up a lot of time. He would start talking about his childhood in Bulgaria. I think SBF is going to try to take a couple of pointers from that strategy, and therefore he can avoid snitching on himself and his colleagues too much. I'd like to see him really take a couple of dings here. It's going to be tough to see that actually happen. Or in other words, I think he's going to try to fight that as much as he can. But I have high hopes here that we can actually get somewhere, at least a starting point for getting the people that lost money on FTX, get them indemnified. Maybe this type of information that they're about to grill him on can help inform the lawsuits that are going to follow, all the bankruptcy filings, things like that. I got lucky and I didn't lose money on FTX because I withdrew all of my crypto within about 24 hours before it all got taken down. So I was one of the last people. Oh, here we go.
The committee will come to order.
Let me know if there's any issue with the sound.
Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. This hearing is entitled Investigating the Collapse of FTX, Part 1. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes to give an opening statement. First, I'd like to welcome Mr. John Ray III, who has been appointed CEO of FTX to oversee its bankruptcy, to testify before our committee for the first part of our investigation into the fall of FTX. I am hopeful that the arrest of Mr. Bankman-Fried, the founder and former CEO of FTX, means he will be held accountable for the fraud he has committed and the harm he has caused. He was scheduled to testify under oath before this committee today. Unfortunately, the timing of his arrest denies the public the opportunity to get the answers they deserve. Rest assured that this committee will not stop until we uncover the full truth behind the collapse of FTX. Just a few months ago, FTX was one of the largest cryptocurrency exchanges in the world, with a valuation of $32 billion in just 3 years since its founding. Today, FTX is bankrupt and possibly looted. FTX misused an approximately $10 billion in customer funds and owes creditors at least $3 billion. Today, as many as 1 million people, many of whom are here in the United States, are locked out of their FTX accounts and may recover only a fraction of their hard-earned investments, if any at all. But this failure is not just noteworthy for its size, but for the company's total disregard for standard business practices, governance, risk management, and criminal conduct. Mr. Ray, who also oversaw one of the largest corporate bankruptcies in United States history, Enron, declared that he had never in his career seen such, and I quote, complete failure of corporate controls and such a complete absence of trustworthy financial information as occurred here, end of quote. I'm so deeply troubled to learn how common it was for Bankman-Fried and FTX employees to steal from the cookie jar of customer funds to finance their lavish lifestyles.
So his arrest is going to prevent him from testifying.
Today, this committee will dig deeper into Mr. Ray's findings with the hopes of piecing together the events that led to the collapse of FTX and the subsequent harm to millions of customers who put their trust in the platform. We will also look at FTX's deep ties with Alameda, a crypto hedge fund predominantly owned by Bankman-Fried that gambled away billions of dollars in customer assets that were inappropriately transferred from FTX. And importantly, we will hear how Mr. Ray and his team are trying to recover funds for customers by piecing together Bankman-Fried's broken record-keeping and by identifying potentially unlawful transfers to himself as well as his friends and family. Under my leadership over the past 4 years, this committee has closely focused on the growth and popularity of crypto precisely because of the many concerns that the failure of FTX has highlighted. Last year, I created a digital assets working group comprised of Democratic members of the committee with the goal of learning more about the underlying technologies, applications for finance, and the risk they pose to customers, consumers, and the economy.
A little skeptical that they're good at it yet.
The President's Working Group on Financial Markets urged Congress to safeguard the economy from stablecoin risk. I and Ranking Member McHenry jumped into action and continue to work on a bill with the members of this committee. The ongoing failures of crypto firms like Terra USD, Celsius, BlockFi, and most significantly,
BlockFi is where I lost.
FTX and Alameda Research only serves to strengthen the importance for Congress and the public to understand the harm caused to customers, what laws have been broken or flaunted, and how Congress and the regulators can prevent this from happening again. I want to say that I'm pleased that the committee's efforts have pushed enforcement agencies across the country to take greater action against bad actors who misuse customers' funds. I also applaud the SEC for authorizing separate charges relating to Mr. Bankman-Fried, and I look forward to additional actions to hold him accountable and make customers more whole again. I yield back. And I now recognize the ranking member of the committee, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McHenry, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've heard everything but the truth. Tweets, DMs, and interviews are no substitute for the facts. And that's why Chairwoman Waters and I worked together to get this hearing on the books, the first bipartisan hearing of this committee in the last 4 years. And we've worked together to invite 2 witnesses. One, Mr. Ray, is proven to be a reliable witness. The second, well, frankly, I look forward to getting his lies here on the record under oath. Nevertheless, the arrest of Sam Bankman-Fried is welcome news. But it still does not get at the bottom of what happened at FTX and why it happened and who else may be responsible. We need to understand the flow of funds between FTX and Alameda Research and the 130 related entities. We need to examine the actions of those who may have contributed to what has been called a, quote, complete failure of corporate controls, end quote. That quote comes from Mr. Ray, the newly appointed CEO. And we need answers for the U.S. platform customers stuck in limbo. But our work here, our work doesn't stop there. We have an obligation to do everything in our power to ensure this never happens again. But let's face it, there's an old saying, there's nothing new under the sun. And it's safe to assume that fraud and fraudsters have been around just as long as that phrase has been around. Bankman-Fried's play is nothing new. We've seen it before. In the late 1800s, when the Union Pacific purposefully inflated the price of railroad construction to line its executive pockets. Or in the 1900s, when the con man George C. Parker was arrested for illegally, quote-unquote, selling the Brooklyn Bridge, Madison Square Garden, and the Statue of Liberty. And in the 2000s, when it was revealed Enron engaged in a massive corporate fraud and corruption, sending shockwaves throughout the business world. There are many comparisons you can draw between each one of these pretenders and the alleged actions of Mr. Bankman-Fried. It appears to be the same old school fraud, just using new technology. But it's important to note, and I think it's very important to note, we still use railroads, we still buy and sell real estate, and we still rely on businesses to provide services. We have to separate out the bad actions of an individual from the good created by an industry and an innovation. So let me be clear. I believe in the promise of digital assets and those around the world building on blockchain technologies. And that's why I've worked and will continue to work to provide clear rules of the road for the digital asset ecosystem here in the United States. And that's how we protect American consumers and investors in this marketplace and allow innovation to occur here in the United States.
You know, this guy's got crypto.
I'll finish with this. We know the Securities Exchange Commission Chair Gensler's regulation by enforcement approach is not going to stop bad actors. Next year, I look forward to hearing from Mr. Gensler early and often. And we'll hear from him on how we can provide clarity on the application of our securities laws to trading platforms, which he has failed to do. The Financial Services Committee has an important role to play in this fact-finding mission, which we will start today and continue as we work towards a legislative outcome to prevent this from happening again. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
I want to welcome our witness for this hearing, John J. Ray III, who is the Chief Executive Officer of FTX Group. Without objection, your written statement will be made part of the record. You will have 5 minutes to present your oral testimony. You should be able to see a timer that will indicate how much time you have left. I would ask you to be mindful of the timer so that we can be respectful of everyone's time. Mr. Ray, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to present your oral testimony.
Can't wait to see this guy snitch.
Chairwoman Waters, Ranking Member McHenry, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for your invitation to appear today. I truly appreciate your interest in this matter, and I hope my testimony can be helpful to you as the committee continues its inquiry into the collapse of FTX.
Dude needs to speak up.
That are underway to help those who've been harmed. I accepted the position of Chief Executive Officer of FTX in the early morning hours of November 11. Immediately, it became clear to me that Chapter 11 was the best course available to preserve any remaining value of FTX. Therefore, my first act as CEO was to authorize the Chapter 11 filings. I've implemented a 5-part bankruptcy plan, which is detailed in my written statement.
Guy just sounds
The
exhausted.
overarching objective is to maximize value for FTX customers and creditors so that we can mitigate to the greatest extent possible the harm suffered by so many. The FTX Group's collapse appears to stem from absolute concentration of control in the hands of a small group of grossly inexperienced and unsophisticated individuals who failed to implement virtually any of the systems or controls that are necessary for a company entrusted with other people's money or assets. Some of the unacceptable management practices identified so far include the use of computer infrastructure that gave individuals in senior management access to systems that stored customer assets without security controls to prevent them from redirecting those assets. The storing of certain private keys to access hundreds of millions of dollars in crypto assets without effective security controls or encryption. The ability of Alameda to borrow funds held at FTX.com to be utilized for its own trading or investments without any effective limits whatsoever. The commingling of assets, the lack of complete documentation for transactions involving nearly 500 separate investments made with FTX Group funds and assets, and the absence of audited or reliable financial statements. The lack of personnel in financial and risk management functions, and the absence of independent governance throughout the FTX Group. A fundamental challenge we face is that we're in many respects starting from near zero in terms of the corporate infrastructure and record keeping that one would expect in a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Still, in just over 4 weeks, we've instituted meaningful steps to gain command and control And every week, we gain a better understanding of what occurred and the path forward, all of which will be shared with interested parties and affected parties throughout the Chapter 11 processes. The scope of our investigation
How much money you
is
guys
truly enormous.
think users are going to get back?
Detailed tracing
Any?
of money flows and asset
5%?
transfers
10%?
from the time of FTX's founding, and complex technological efforts to identify and trace crypto assets. We are in the process of collecting and reviewing dozens of terabytes of documents and data, including billions of individual transactions. We're leveraging sophisticated technology and expertise to identify and trace additional transactions and assets. While many things are unknown at this stage, we're at a very preliminary stage, many questions remain. We know the following. First, customer assets at FTX.com were commingled with assets from the Alameda trading platform. That much is clear.
They just stole our shit.
Second, Alameda used client funds to engage in margin trading, which exposed customer funds to massive losses. Third, the FTX group went on a spending binge in 2021 and 2022, during which $5 billion was spent on a myriad of businesses and investments, many of which may only be worth a fraction of what was paid for them. Fourth, loans and other payments were made to insiders in excess of $1.5 billion. Fifth, Alameda's business model as a market maker required funds to be deployed to various third-party exchanges, which were inherently unsafe and further exacerbated by the limited protections offered in certain of those foreign jurisdictions. I know that resolution of the Chapter 11 process, as well as the investigation into the causes of the FTX Group's collapse, are of keen interest to this committee and to your constituents. Although, there are many who need and deserve answers. There's customers, there's creditors, there's investors, counterparties, employees, and regulators. We're positioning ourselves to provide each of these constituents with answers that they deserve. Although a bankruptcy proceeding of this unprecedented nature will take some time to run its course, I'm committed to working as quickly as possible to investigate what happened, formulate conclusions, and hopefully inform the committee's work here. I should note that my ability to comment on certain of the matters today will be inherently limited by the state of FTX's records, ongoing bankruptcy proceedings, and of course the numerous ongoing investigations by the U.S. law enforcement regulators. I look forward to answering your questions to the best of my ability. Thank you again for allowing me to present in front of this committee. Thank you.
Dude ain't holding back.
Thank
man.
you
He's
very
gonna
much.
snitch hard.
Mr. Ray, it has been widely reported how FTX shifted customer funds held at the exchange to Alameda Research, which was a hedge fund owned almost entirely by Mr. Bankman-Fried. This allowed the firm to effectively gamble with customer money without their knowledge or consent. If FTX was registered as a securities exchange, several laws would have required the segregation of customer assets and prevented such clear conflicts of interest. Mr. Bankman-Fried also appears to have tried to hide the linkages between the exchange and his hedge fund. Have you seen evidence of such a cover-up? Have you seen evidence that there was any independent governance of Alameda separate and apart from that of the exchange?
The operations of the XTF group were not segregated. It was really operated as one company. As a result, there's no distinction virtually between the operations of the company and who controlled those operations.
Well, Mr. Ray, another bankruptcy filing revealed that Mr. Bankman-Fried personally received a $1 billion loan from Alameda Research. In a meeting with committee staff, Mr. Bankman-Fried was unaware of the terms of the repayment, interest details, and could not confidently state who authorized the loan. He claimed that he reinvested this money into the exchange, but knowingly chose to have the loan issued to him rather than FTX to avoid directly connecting Alameda Research to FTX. Can you elaborate on any significant findings in connection with this loan?
The loans that were given to Mr. Bankman-Fried were not just one loan, it was numerous loans, some of which were documented by individual promissory notes. There's no description of what the purpose of the loan was. In one instance, he signed both as the issuer of the loan as well as the recipient of the loan. But we have no information at this time as to what the purpose or the use of those funds were, and that is part of our investigation.
Did you find any business or operational activities that the entities jointly engaged in that you would consider inappropriate or detrimental to FTX? If so, could you give us an example?
Certainly, thank you. The operation of Alameda really depended, based on the way it was operated, for the use of customer funds. That's the major breakdown here. Funds from FTX.com, which was the exchange for non-U.S. citizens. Those funds were used at Alameda to make investments and other disbursements.
Did FTX have sufficient risk management systems
It's going to be a good answer.
and controls to appropriately monitor any leverage the business took on and the interconnections it had with businesses like, again, Alameda?
There were virtually no internal controls and no separateness whatsoever.
With that, I'm going to call on the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McHenry, who is the ranking member of the committee. You're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Ray, thank you for your testimony. We had your predecessor, Mr. Sam Bankman-Fried, before this committee a year ago. And given where we are, can we just start from the beginning? You have in your declarations some clear outlines, but I want to make sure we have this in the record. There are different groups of businesses under the FTX platform or umbrella. Your declarations separate the businesses into 4 silos. We described that.
Yes, for structural purposes and just for ease of presentation, we tried to take the over 100 entities and we put those in 4 silos. To demystify that, it's very simple. There was a U.S. silo, which was the FTX U.S. exchange for U.S. Investors. There was an international exchange called FTX.com, again for non-U.S. persons that invested in crypto. There was Alameda, which is purely a crypto hedge fund, which made other investments, venture capital type investments. Then there's a 4th entity, which was purely investments, and although our investigation is not complete, those investments were most likely made with either Alameda money or money that originally came from FTX.com. But that 4th silo is just purely investments.
What I'm gathering so far is that they just took our money and gambled it. Alameda gambled it and traded like shit and lost money.
Okay.
That's it. That's all this whole thing was. It was just
the differences between
it wasn't even a pump and dump. It was just
and
some
FTX
bullshit. They took our money and gambled it and lost.
silos.
Literally.
Yes, very simply, FTX U.S. was for U.S. citizens who wanted to trade crypto. FTX.com was for, U.S. citizens were not allowed to trade on that exchange. That's very simple, and I would make one other comment, which is separate and apart from any of those 2 silos. It was Ledger X, which is a regulated entity regulated by the CFTC, solvent and separate from the FTX U.S. silo.
Okay, and that is a distinct silo. That's a distinct company.
That is a distinct company within the U.S. silo, yes.
Okay, so then Alameda Research and the venture capital businesses, what did Alameda Research do?
Essentially made crypto investments, engaged in, margin trading, took long and short positions in crypto, essentially invested in crypto. But
Traded
of
like
course,
shit,
we
that's
now
what he just
know
said.
Also invested in over $5 billion of other assets, which are in a variety of sectors.
And what was the practice between Alameda Research and FTX.com? Do you have you established anything you can disclose to us today?
In essence, Alameda was a user, effectively a customer of FTX.com. That's how it was essentially structured.
Was that a distinct set of capital between those two companies?
Well, we now know the answer to that is no.
No. Okay. And with the information you have right now, when approximately did FTX begin to experience financial trouble?
Well, it was first disclosed to the public.
They probably had a
beginning
great
around
year,
November
though.
2nd.
I mean, 2021 must have been a blast for FTX people.
When this began was months, if not, earlier years. Our investigation is continuing. But this is not something that happened overnight or in the context of a week.
Okay. So you had the distinction between FTX US, FTX.com, Alameda Research. What was the relationship between FTX.com and FTX US? Was there a distinction between the two?
There was a public distinction between the two. What we're seeing, though, is that the crypto assets for both FTX.com and for FTX US, were housed in the same database. It's called the AWS system, which is just an acronym for Amazon Web Services. It was all housed in the same web format.
And is that distinct from Alameda's assets?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So in your testimony, you said that there is, quote, an absence of independent governance throughout the FTX group, end quote. Yet Mr. Bankman-Fried has said that, quote, he wasn't running Alameda or making decisions on the Alameda side, end quote. Is this an accurate statement by Mr. I assume you're going to say your statement's accurate. Is Mr. Bankman-Fried's statement accurate?
I don't know the basis for his comment. I will note that he owned 90% of Alameda.
So, but you've seen no distinction in governance between the two?
Oh, absolutely not. There's no distinction whatsoever. The owners of the company could really run free reign across all four silos.
Thank you for testimony.
The gentlewoman from New York, Mrs. Velasquez,
It's theft, man.
who is
There's
also
no way
the chair
around
of the
it.
House Committee on Small Business, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Ray. You have had a long career working on several high-profile bankruptcies, most notably the Enron debacle.
What a cool
Mr.
job,
Ray, you were recently quoted in the New York Times as saying you have never seen such a complete failure of corporate control, and the level of dysfunction was the worst you have ever seen. Can you expand on these statements and what you have seen since taking over as CEO to make such a remark?
Yes, thank you. That comment went to really, one thing that we found, which, every case is different. The challenges of every case is different. The issue here that I was speaking to is I've just never seen an utter lack of record keeping. Absolutely no internal controls whatsoever. And of course, this case is then made difficult in that context when you're dealing with technology.
Mr. Ray, a number of debtors in the FTX group are located in offshore jurisdictions. Will this complicate the efforts to retrieve the assets of those debtors?
What are you getting shit? And she knows it. He knows it.
No, I don't think
I
it
bet
would
$0 back.
complicated at all. The various jurisdictions historically in bankruptcy, and I've been in a number of cross-border situations, the jurisdictions will cooperate with each other. The regulators in all these jurisdictions, I think, realize that everyone's there for a common purpose to protect the victims and to recover assets for the victims of these situations.
How much have you been able to secure, and where are most of these assets located?
We've been able to secure, over $1 billion of assets. We've secured those to cold wallets in a secure location. It's an ongoing process, though, which will take, weeks and perhaps months to secure all of the assets.
Are most creditors located in the U.S. or foreign jurisdictions?
The majority of the creditors trade through the .com silo and are outside of this jurisdiction, although there are some foreign customers that are on the U.S. silo and vice versa.
So it is my understanding you established 4 silos. Can you explain why you believe establishing these silos and taking this approach will maximize asset recovery for creditors? And do you think this approach could help determine what happened to the $1 billion that is gone missing?
Yes. So one of the reasons why we set up the silos the way we did was to first focus on the FTX silo for the U.S. It's a relatively smaller trading volume, fewer users. It's truly meant, to be for the U.S. customers. The .com silo is really for non-U.S. customers, so there's a logical reason why we separated those two out. The Alameda Fund, well, that's just the fund that, that drew resources from the exchanges. So it's really separate. It was not for customers per se. It was just simply a hedge fund.
As we here in Congress consider the possibility of legislation in this area, what is the one thing that you have seen in your short amount of time at FTX that you will urge us to keep in mind or is needed the most?
I don't want to speak to detailed regulations or make observations about regulations. That's certainly not an area of my expertise. However, we're dealing with people's money and their assets. And, my basic observation is you need records, you need controls, and you need to segregate people's money.
Thank you.
That's simple.
Thank you.
Down with this Miss
Chair,
Velasquez, though. She's all right. She came at him, could have come at him a little bit more.
The
But, here we go.
gentlewoman from Missouri, Mrs. Wagner, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
You'll
Thank
be
you, Madam
hating on
Chairwoman.
Maxine, but
Thank you,
I think
Mr.
she
Ray, for
can.
being
She
here
does
for
this
the work
job
that you're
good.
doing.
I don't know about the rest of her
Mr.
job,
Ray,
but this
you
one
have
she does good.
compared FTX as worse than Enron. Can you please elaborate on some of the specific ways FTX is worse than one of the largest corporate frauds in history?
The FTX group is unusual in the sense that, I've done probably a dozen large, scale bankruptcies over my career, including Enron, of course. Every one of those entities had some financial problem or another. They have some characteristics that are in common. This one is unusual, and it's unusual in the sense that literally, there's no record keeping whatsoever. It's in the absence of record keeping. Employees would communicate, invoicing and expenses on Slack, which is, essentially a way of communicating for chat rooms. They use QuickBooks, a multi-billion-dollar company using QuickBooks.
QuickBooks?
QuickBooks. Nothing against QuickBooks, very nice tool, just not for a multi-billion-dollar company.
I would have thought
There's no
QuickBooks is good.
independent
That's more than I do.
board, right?
I don't do any record keeping.
We had one person really controlling this. No independent board. That's highly unusual.
Don't tell my accountant
Size company this is. And it's made all more complex because we're not dealing with, widgets or, or something that's tangible. We're dealing with crypto. And the technological issues are made worse when you're dealing with an asset such as crypto.
Mr. Ray, Mr. Bankman-Fried has apologized. I'll subquote here, for mistakes he has made. Based on your review, is there a way to know if the transfer of FTX customer funds to Alameda Research was done by mistake?
I don't find any such statements to be credible.
Reports suggest that FTX.com transferred more than half of its customer funds, roughly $10 billion, to Alameda Research. Is that accurate, sir?
Our work is not done. We don't have exact numbers for you today, but I will say it's several $billion in that range. So we know the size of the harm was significant.
Mr. Ray, FTX.com held itself out as having a sophisticated risk management system commensurate with the size of its operations. You've touched on this a little bit. Based on your work to date, is this accurate? And can you explain the, quote, sophistication of its risk management system?
I can say that's absolutely false. There was no sophistication whatsoever. There was an absence of any management.
Mr. Ray, Mr. Bankman-Fried has been able to confuse interviewers by talking in circles around the multiple business activities of FTX.com. Mr. Ray, would you break down for us the different business, quote, activities of FTX.com?
Much of this I've described. Essentially, they had two exchanges for allowed users to trade crypto. And then there was the hedge fund. It's as simple as that. The users, were allowed to make a variety of investments. They had a more expansive ability to trade crypto if you were a non-U.S. citizen on the .com exchange. But I know it's been described publicly as very complex, and it is to some extent. But essentially, you had two exchanges, and you had a hedge fund. Inside both the U.S. silo, as I've mentioned, and inside the silos for .com, there were regulated entities. We have regulated entities that are, for example, in Japan that are solvent. We had regulated entity LedgerX that was solvent. Those are sort of distinct from the other basic.
I still have money. I had money on
operations that we
LedgerX
have,
for a
which were the
while.
two
They're still
exchanges.
operating, which is
I
luck.
thank you,
I don't know how they're
Mr.
still
Ray.
operating.
And Madam Chairwoman, I'd like to submit an op-ed for the record describing an existing SEC rule that could have prevented customer assets from being misused. And I appreciate my constituent, Ron Kruszewski, President of CEO of Stifel Nicholas, for his thoughtful comments. I associate myself with those, and I'd like this entered for the record. I thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, who is also the chair of the Subcommittee on Investor Protection, Entrepreneurship, and Capital Markets, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
For 5 years, I've been trying to ban American investments in crypto. I'm the only member of the House to get an F from the only crypto-promoting organization that rates members of Congress. My fear is that we'll view Sam Bankman-Fried as
Stonked up. I'm pausing the video to say thank you so much for having my back. I appreciate you.
just one big snake in a crypto Garden of Eden. The fact is, crypto is a garden of snakes. Now, from the outside, crypto just looks like a non-fungible token, an electronic pet rock for the 21st century, something that might be good to invest in even though it has no apparent value because you might get somebody else to buy it from you for even more.
Yeah, I don't like this guy at all, but
the
he
hope of crypto
kind of right.
is to be a currency, to
Yes.
compete with the U.S. dollar,
No.
and to announce its advantage over the U.S. dollar in that competition.
A little bit.
It puts the advantage right in the name. Crypto, hidden currency.
I don't know. I don't like this dude.
Well, what is there a
Get this
big
guy out
market
here.
for that?
He's-
Is there a big
he's jacked up.
advantage
He's jacked
that
up.
crypto has over the U.S. dollar if it actually became a currency, which it's not yet? Well, there are drug dealers, human traffickers, sanctions evaders who will find that to be
People
a good
that
feature.
want to make international
And as Sam
transactions without
Bankman-Fried would
paying
tell you,
Western
there's a
Union.
hell of a market for bankruptcy court evasion. But the big market is tax evasion. And I know there are some on the other side who cheer every time a billionaire escapes taxes. The other announced purpose of crypto is to compete with the U.S. dollar as a world reserve currency,
I don't think that's correct.
thereby
I don't think anybody wants that.
enriching the corporate billionaire bros and taking thousands of dollars of advantage away from every American family.
This could have been a Twitter rant. I don't know why he's
we
wasting
benefit from
time. He
being
should
a
be
reserve
asking questions
currency.
about FTX.
Now, Sam Bankman-Fried, or should I say inmate 14372, had one purpose in all of his efforts here in Congress. Was a well-known figure, only one wearing shorts. His one purpose was to keep the SEC out of crypto, to provide a patina of regulation, baby regulation from the CFTC. And I'll have one comment from my colleagues. Don't trash Sam Bankman-Fried and then pass his bill. I fear that could happen because Sam was not the only crypto bro with PACs and lobbyists, and there is no PAC or lobbyist here.
Which
work
district
for
does this dude
efficient
represent?
tax
Because he's
enforcement
old, man.
or sanctions
He's
enforcement.
lost, man. He's lost.
Now, I've heard from some on the other side criticizing the SEC. In July, in this room, I criticized the head of the SEC for not going, the head of enforcement of the SEC for not going after crypto exchanges. But the fact is that
What is Sam's bill? Can somebody explain
without
that?
objection, I'd like to put in the record a letter signed by 19 Republican members designed to push back on the SEC, a brushback pitch, if you're familiar with baseball.
Without objection, such is the order.
Thank you. Attacking the SEC for paying attention to, and I'll quote, the purported risks of digital assets. And I'd like to put on the record, without objection, comments from 8 members made in this room that were designed to attack the SEC as being a Luddite and anti-innovation for their efforts. Mr. Ray,
Can I ask a question now? 3
you're
minutes
going to
in.
be looking at FTX. We know that Sam Bankman-Fried is already faces criminal charges, but he did have help. Will you be looking for and turning over to U.S. Law enforcement authorities information about the possible criminal actions by Ryan Salome, Carolyn Ellison, and the other folks in the fancy apartment?
We are doing a thorough investigation, and we will, of course, we have been cooperating with the U.S. regulators and law enforcement agencies, so we will cooperate to turn over any information that would be relevant to them.
Thank you. And I'll point out in particular that one of the counts, count 8 in the complaint or indictment, is violation of campaign finance laws. And I hope that what you will turn over is a list of the major bonuses and or loans. It's reported that Ryan Salome got a $55 million loan, so that law enforcement can piece together when those loans and bonuses were made and whether they immediately preceded illegal campaign, disguised campaign contributions. Can we count on you to do that?
Yes, I can confirm that.
My time has expired.
Thank you. The gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lucas, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Ray, for appearing before the committee this morning, particularly in light of the recent arrest of Bankman-Fried. I expected you to be very cautious this morning in your answers, and in fact, I suspect you have been, but you've been very thorough and methodical in the committee, and I appreciate it indeed. First, I'd like to discuss the bankruptcy process, Mr. Ray. It's our understanding that some of the FTX entities were not included in bankruptcy, including Ledger X. Could you explain why
So
those
lucky
entities
Ledger
were
X
not
was
included
excluded.
and what might ultimately happen with them?
Ledger X is a perfect example of the entities that were kept out of bankruptcy. It's a regulated entity. It's fully solvent. The customer funds were segregated. We believe that there's been no harm there whatsoever. There's no reason to put it into bankruptcy. Ultimately, we will look to sell Ledger X and put it in the hands of a good steward.
And would you expand on how U.S. bankruptcy proceedings interact with international proceedings, for instance, like those in Australia?
Yes, the system is really designed to have a cooperative relationship with liquidators in other jurisdictions. We share information, we cooperate with each other relative to maximizing customer value and ultimately facilitating distributions and overall facilitation of the completion of the scheme in order to render customers as whole as possible.
As we've all seen, of course, SEC has charged Mr. Bankman-Fried with defaulting investors along with charges from the CFTC and the Southern District of New York. In your testimony, you described FTX Group as having unacceptable management practices, and you made that graphically clear, in particular to how Mr. Bankman-Fried is accused of. The SEC specifically alleges that one way in which Mr. Bankman-Fried diverted FTX funds to Alameda Research was by directing customers to deposit cash into Alameda-controlled bank accounts. Mr. Ray, could you explain how FTX was able to conceal that?
We're still, somewhat early in our investigation, but we can confirm that funds were deposited directly into Alameda as opposed to FTX bank accounts. Unfortunate, obviously, situation.
One last question on the bankruptcy. It's been reported that FTX Digital and FTX Australia were not included in the bankruptcy filing because local regulators had already initiated their own proceedings. Is it true that they could not have been included because of that?
Yes, our filing occurred on November 11, and there was other filings that had occurred shortly before.
One last thought, Mr. Ray. Clearly your profession is cleaning up messes that other people have made. That's a fair way to describe it. Not messes that you made, but they made. How does this compare, in your experience, magnitude-wise?
Well, it's
the worst or the worst by magnitude?
Lucas, speak up.
It's one of the worst from a documentation standpoint. Even in the most failed companies, you have a fair roadmap of what happened. We're dealing with literally a sort of a paperless bankruptcy in terms of how they created this company. It makes it very difficult to trace and track assets, and particularly, as I've said, in the crypto world. It's really unprecedented in terms of the lack of documentation.
Bankman-Fried clearly tried to exhibit himself as the brightest of the bright. But being bright neither makes you honest nor a fool, does it? Thank you, Mr. Ray.
Thank you. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, who is also the chair of the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I thank the witness for appearing today. Sir, I have in my left hand a sealed indictment from a grand jury as it relates to Mr. Samuel Bankman-Fried, and in my right hand, the Securities and Exchange Commission's complaint that has been filed against the same defendant. Let's put aside the civil complaint. I have one question, but first I'd like to lay a predicate by going through these charges in the criminal complaint. Wire fraud on customers, conspiracy to commit wire fraud on lenders, conspiracy to commit commodities fraud, conspiracy to commit securities fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering, and the list goes on with a few others. I mention these things to you, sir, because Dr. King reminded us that nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. Mr. Bankman-Fried has pretty much indicated that he just made a big mistake, that he was doing the best that he could to be a servant and of great service to humankind. But I would also mention this: he did attend Canada USA Math Camp, a summer program for mathematically talented high school students. He also has a degree from MIT, 2014, bachelor's degree in physics with a minor in mathematics. Is all of this just one big mistake that was made by this gentleman, sir, as you see it, based upon what you've seen so far? It looks to me like there may be some malfeasance here.
You know, we're certainly, investigating everything that happened relative to these circumstances. At this stage, we're trying not to, lay judgment or put labels on actions. We're focused on, accumulating and maximizing the assets for the victims. That's our number one priority. In doing so, we will also investigate potential causes of actions to maximize value. And that does require us to get into the underlying facts and motivations and what happened. So we fully expect to explore that.
He also won the
Thank you.
kindergarten coloring competition.
Would you consider this to be
1992.
sincere ignorance?
Again, I don't want to put labels on it. Obviously, there's been failure here of a massive proportion. Ultimately, like others will judge him by his actions.
I find it difficult to believe that we're dealing with conscientious stupidity. It seems to me that you'd have to be rather talented to do all of these things to the extent that they were done and do them successfully for as long as he was able to accomplish these things, that they just don't emanate from ignorance and stupidity. And a lot of people have been hurt. And aside from the civil actions, I think that we have to send a message to the others who would take advantage of people that this is not going to be tolerated. And I thank you for what you've done. You've been very direct. I read your testimony. And based upon your testimony, it just seems to me that we have more than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Sessions.
Madam Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Ray,
Jeff
thank you
Sessions.
very much for being here. I think each of our members have been sincere in saying thank you for your professionalism and adding this to your career of other restructuring that you have not only experience in, but bringing to bear. I've got several questions, and perhaps you can answer them, which would help me. At its best, largest point of investor exposure by an American investor, what amount of money do you think that was held in FTX?
I'm not in a position really to give you individual numbers at this point. We do know with the U.S., there's hundreds of millions of dollars that were at stake. And of course, on the .com, which is the international exchange, that's in the billions of dollars. There's one of the difficulties we have is that there's millions of accounts. Some of those accounts, could be by multiple users. So we're in the process of really analyzing how those accounts roll up to individual customers.
Are you aware of the SEC at any point asking questions, coming to visit, providing paperwork about these hundreds of millions or billions of dollars that drew some attention from the SEC about this American investment, or what I would say exposure?
I'm not, but you have to recognize that I, parachuted in on November 11th, so I have no history with the company whatsoever.
So you do not know about any questions, interaction? Have you heard about whether there was an attempt to avoid any of this? Was any of it ever discussed by any of the people that you have gained information from?
I'm not privy to anything on a pre-petition basis.
Thank you. Do you have an idea about the value of assets that was lent to FTX, by FTX or Alameda to Mr. Bankman-Fried, the amount of money that they loaned him?
Well, we know that the size of the loss, measured essentially, at this period of time is several billion dollars, but you have to remember that, asset values, fluctuate. So how much the assets are worth at the time that they may have been transferred to FTX.com may be a different number than the loss as of any particular date. We do, of course, know that we have several billion dollars of losses, and we know that there was billions of dollars lent out, billions of dollars of other investments, so that we essentially have a roadmap to figure that out.
The roadmap that you're speaking about, in your past, I don't claim you necessarily know it now, were IRS forms that were filled out by the company, were they properly filled out? Have you looked at those to see that they were complying with the IRS law?
We are looking into that very thing. We've hired Ernst & Young. They are taking a comprehensive review. They're going backwards and starting with the earlier years. We're reviewing the return that was filed in 2020, 2021, and of course, they're looking at all the transactions within 2022. So that review is ongoing, and we certainly will look at that in detail.
As an expert, I would consider you an expert in this arena. Would you think that it would be important that the SEC, and I don't know the law, but would have access to, as part of their any due diligence they were doing, to look at that IRS filing to determine perhaps whether someone was or was not following the law? Would that be part of a due diligence?
Well, we certainly would make anything like that available to any of the regulatory agencies, whether it's the SEC or the IRS. We're fully cooperative to them. Anything that would aid in their investigation, it would be available to them.
Do you think it would be pertinent for this committee to be able to receive that IRS information going back so that we would make a determination about whether proper utilization of oversight was being done?
We certainly, we want to be cooperative with the committee as well, and we can certainly work with staff to address what you might need.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairwoman.
Thank you. The gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Cleaver, who is also the chair of the Subcommittee on Housing, Community Development, and Insurance, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Ray, thank you so kindly for being here today. Have you read the full testimony that was planned by our missing guest?
I have not read his full testimony. Some pieces of it have been relayed to me, but I've not read it. I've not read one word of it, actually.
Yeah, I don't know him personally and probably don't want to, but his testimony is so disrespectful. I mean, there's not a person up here who would like to show this to their children in line 2 of this missive. He says, and I quote, "I would like to start out by formally stating under oath." You can't say it. And I can't even say it publicly. The next 2 words, absolutely insulting. This is the Congress of the United States. And I'd like to submit this, Madam Chair, for the record.
Without objection, if you're inserting that into the record. Without objection, such is the order.
I want to follow up on what Mr. Sessions, on the discussion Mr. Sessions was having with you on this, the issue. And if you are required, I mean, we have one requirement that you are supposed to submit to each customer and the IRS, the Form 109B. right?
Yes.
What else are you required to do?
I'd have to defer to the tax folks. They're experts in that field, and I'm sure they'll do a thorough review of what should have been submitted.
No, what do you know now that you are supposed to submit other than the 109D to every customer and to the Internal Revenue Service?
I don't know personally at this point, what was required to be submitted. That's part of our review with our independent accountants.
Well, could you expand or maybe even update us on the extent of the poor controls in the areas previously identified in your November 17th declaration?
It's an extensive list. It really crosses the entire spectrum of the company, from lack of lists of bank accounts, hundreds of bank accounts dispersed all over the world, lack of just a complete list of employees and their functions by group or name, extensive use of independent contractors as opposed to employees. Lack of insurance that you normally would see in certain businesses, either inadequate insurance or complete gaps in insurance. For example, the Alameda silo had no insurance whatsoever. So those are, the list goes on and on. We could spend all day on that.
Yeah, we have time, but I wonder if you would support a resolution that I've been thinking about introducing, changing the name of cryptocurrency to creepy dough currency. I'm going to discuss this with my colleagues. I think it's an appropriate name. I just wanted to know whether you would support changing it to creepy dough.
I'll leave that skill set to the committee.
All right, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman
that's
from
like
Missouri, Mr. Luke
not even a
Meyer,
joke.
is
That was
now
just kind of
recognized
dumb.
for
Creepy
5
dough.
minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Come on, man.
Mr. Ray, it's been reported that FTX couldn't get a bank account for
everybody's
some
cringing.
time. As a result, FTX used Alameda Research's bank accounts. Does this raise any red flags for you, the fact they couldn't find a way to get a bank account?
Well, there's a few red flags. Obviously, the bank situation should have been a real red flag for someone being asked to deposit money into an account that was not the exchange account. Certainly should have been a red flag for customers.
Is Alameda a U.S. chartered bank, or is it offshore? Or the bank that they were using, I should say.
It's really not a bank per se. It's just most of the entities in the structure are, they're just unregulated entities.
Yeah, I got accepted to a focus group.
Just an entity that passes through money. It's a hedge fund that does things. It doesn't have a bank
At-home
account per se.
self-collected blood sample. Yeah.
Oh, it has bank accounts,
All right.
absolutely.
I'm gonna donate my
US?
blood for money.
Yes.
Okay, so here we have a company that's offshore. It can't get a bank account offshore. It has to come into the U.S. to be able to do its banking business. In other words, and the important part of this comment is that in order for these companies to exist, they've got to be able to change their digital assets into hard U.S. dollars at some point. So they need a bank account. And so they needed Alameda to be able to do that. Is that roughly correct?
Any of the silos had in bank accounts, that certainly exists. Separate bank accounts do exist. I think the real issue here for us is that money was transferred from one account to the other, seemingly without limit. That is the issue.
Okay, you talked about the accounting issues. It's interesting from the standpoint that we're talking today about a problem with these cryptocurrency firms, with securities firms, and we can't have an accounting system that actually works. This should be a really big red flag for all of us who are in the financial services world with regards to the Chinese
investments that we're making, and we're not able to get accounting information on those firms. What else is going on with those firms, similar to what the debacle is that we have here with FTX? That's just a sidelight comment. One of the questions I've got is with regards to the Farmington State Bank. This is an investment that Alameda made into, and it's a little bitty bank according to a New York Times article. State of Washington, 26th smallest bank out of 4,800 in the country. They bought it in 2020, had a net worth of $5.7 million, and they dropped $11.5 million in for a percentage of the ownership. Do you know off the top of your head what the percentage of ownership was in that bank that they purchased?
I believe that ownership was approximately 10%, but I can
Okay, that's what I've heard too. So therefore, they paid 20 times book, which is off the charts outrageous. So it should be a red flag over the place. Yet they were able to purchase that, even though it's a minority interest, but 20 times book. FDIC allowed that to happen. They changed names to Moonstone Bank. And since then, they've 4 separate accounts have dropped to roughly $71 million, again, according to FDIC data and according to this article. Have you looked at this relationship at all yet to see what's going on here and whether there's any irregularities at all?
I think this dude bought
we are
crypto
looking at it.
IPOs
It's certainly
and Chinese company
it's getting our
IPOs.
attention fairly quickly. We're looking at what the dollars were that went from the FTX group to that bank, and we're looking at the connections of that bank to the Bahamas.
Is it the way this all transacted here? Is this common, by the way, that they purchase businesses and dump excessive amounts of money based on the fact they had it, whether it was a good investment or not, in all these different companies? I mean, this looks like a really excessive investment to actually go out and buy a bank to be able to do something with it, stuff it full of money. So I don't know, is there money laundering going on here? Is there some missing dollars? Is somebody stuffing away something in their back pocket to be able to at some point down the road take off with it? Is that what's going on here? I mean, it begs a lot of questions here when you see this kind of activity.
Well, there's a lot more questions than there are answers. Certainly, it's highly irregular, and that's what's gotten our attention.
Well, I thank you for your comments this morning, and it's concerning when you see this sort of lack of accounting, and you see somebody dealing in this sort of level of money, and there's lots of different companies where money shifts back and forth, and you wonder, by living offshore in the Bahamas, if there's not some faraway bank account that's being stuffed with money we'll never ever find. I hope you do your job and do it well, Mr. Ray. Thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you. The gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter, who is also the chair of the Subcommittee on Consumer Protection and Financial Institutions. You're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Mr. Ray, I have so many questions, it's hard to even figure out what questions to ask. So let's just start with some easy ones. How long have you been on this job?
4 weeks.
4 weeks. Do you know when the Madoff bankruptcy was filed?
It's going to be good.
Probably circa 2008, I guess. I don't know.
So say 2008. And do you know they just made a distribution out of that bankruptcy last week?
That's what I understand, yes.
So that's, what, 14 years? How
Yes.
old are you?
Is that a permitted question?
Because I want you to add 100 to whatever your age is when you finally untangle all of this. And the reason I say that is we watched this FTX, but a bunch of other crypto companies start thrashing about.
He's
say,
working
9,
towards
10,
something.
12
I'm
months
good with it
ago.
for now.
And as the house of cards started falling down, the thrashing became more. We had something like that in Colorado back in the 80s when the savings and loans were failing, and everybody was sort of trading their funny money. We called it trading cats for dogs to hide lousy loans, to not show the failures of those particular banks. Here, your job, I think, as the bankruptcy trustee or conservator or whatever you are, is to go gather as many assets as you can, and that could be from some very innocent people who got paid money, to then spread it out equally among who you think the real creditors are, or, I mean, is that sort of a fair statement?
It's a general statement, but it's not far off.
Well, because we on this committee, and a number of us had to deal with the Madoff stuff, you know, one of the things you're going to face is some guy say, I'm more innocent than that guy. You know, I should get to keep my money, even though I got paid yesterday, but I'm an innocent guy. You're going to be dealing with so many preferences, so many fraudulent transfers. I mean, have you any idea what the total money in and the total money out of FTX was?
We don't have a full accounting at this early stage, no.
Do you know how much was in tokens? So let's say I have Dogecoin, or I don't even know how you say it, but I have 10 Dogecoin, which a year ago, is it Dogecoin or Dogecoin? Dogecoin. All right, I have 10 Dogecoins, all right? A year ago, 10 Dogecoins,
Tuned in at the right
for the sake
time.
of argument, was worth $1,000, so $100 a coin. I put that in there. But Dogecoin today is worth, like, I don't know what, say not nearly that much. I mean, how are you going to evaluate that as to what I should get out of the bankruptcy?
Well, at first it starts with doing an accounting and a tracing of all the assets, you know, both the ins and the outs. And that's made difficult, of course, by the commingling of assets. So perhaps you may have invested in a certain coin or an altcoin. We'll have to trace what happened to that coin, because again, what we've explained here today and through our testimony is there's commingling of assets, so that makes it, you know, a bit more complicated than simply how much is, you know, my coin worth, right? So it's gonna be a painstaking process of looking for the ins and outs, what happened to your crypto. Of course, at the bankruptcy, at the time of the bankruptcy, we know when that occurred. We have a very specific time when that bankruptcy occurred, and we will look at customer accounts as of that date, and that will be determined essentially what your account position was. But of course, you know, assets, you know, vary in terms of fluctuating in value, and again, because of the circumstances we find ourselves in the lack of documentation, the potential commingling between silos.
I'm going to pause for a second just to clarify his question, because it actually is a good one. His question is, if you lose $100 worth of Dogecoin to FTX, all right, down the road we find that we actually can recover some of these assets. Are you going to reimburse people based on the value of the Dogecoin when they lost it, or the value of the Dogecoin when they were able to recover it? That's actually a great question. I think Mt. Gox used the value of the coin, of the Bitcoin, at the time it was lost, not the new value of the Bitcoin, probably because they had no chance in hell of delivering. I think what they would do is use whatever value was lower and pay people based on that. That's what I think.
And then also what happened with Alameda taking funds from FTX.com, it isn't as simple as, you know, how many coins did I have in my account?
Well, I guess what I'm saying is if I put $1,000 in and it's gone, and I put 10 Dogecoins in and they're gone, eventually you're going to have to figure that out. And my guess is you will be back here in a year when you have a better handle on the numbers to be talking to this committee. And thank you for doing this. I yield back.
Thank you very much. You know by now that Mr. Perlmutter is a bankruptcy attorney. You can tell by those questions. So this would be a good time to enter into the record without objection. I would like to enter into the record the indictment of Sam Bankman-Fried by the Southern District of New York that was unsealed this morning, and the separate filings from the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, both of which were filed this morning. Thank you. With that, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Huizinga, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Mr. Ray. I'm going to get my colleague to shift a little bit or get up. Thank you. One quick question. Have you been sharing your findings with the SEC at all as you've been going through this?
Yes.
Okay. How about the Southern District of New York?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to get to a couple of practical questions because I think these were the things I was going to ask you and then also ask Mr. Bankman-Fried. In your declaration, you said that the, quote, the FTX.com platform was not available to U.S. users, close quote. However, earlier this month, CFTC Chairman Benham suggested in testimony before the Senate Agriculture Committee that 2% of funds housed at FTX.com were from U.S. individuals. Can you confirm whether there were U.S. individuals or persons, in fact, customers of FTX.com?
Yes, we found that there's a small number of U.S. Customers that had engaged in as customers at
Is 2% small in your estimation, or is it less or more?
We don't have those kind of numbers on an investor basis. We have it on a customer basis, but you're talking about less than a couple hundred.
But it could amount to billions. I mean, you said earlier it is billions of dollars that was in there, or at least it could be millions or hundreds of thousands. We don't know that number, or do you know that number?
I don't know. I don't know that number. Billions would sound very, very high.
Okay. Well, you had mentioned that there was billions in it.
Yes. Yeah, but clearly,
I'm giving you the range.
Yeah, clearly, as U.S. customers, there we don't have an accounting of what those particular customers had in the .com exchange.
Will determining this be part of your work through this bankruptcy process?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Will part of your work be determining which assets belong to which customers, more specifically U.S. customers of FTX.com?
Yes, we will do really a tracing analysis that will try to identify the sources and the uses of all the funds.
So whether it's 10 customers that had a lot of money or 1,000 customers that had some money?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Can you provide some indication of whether customer funds from FTX.com were in fact transferred to Alameda Research?
Well, it's definitely assets of customers in the .com silo were transferred to Alameda, no question about it. We have not seen this at this stage from the U.S. silo. But of course, we do have one concern, and that's the concern we're chasing down, which is whether or not there's commingling between that .com silo and the U.S. silo exchanges. And the reason for that is we know that there was sort of common control and access of authorized users at this most senior management level amongst all of the assets. So it's something we have to focus on. We haven't seen evidence right now of that, but certainly that's something that we need to investigate and trace.
Okay, and my remaining 2 minutes, I want to turn a little bit to operations. Is there any evidence of his parents' involvement in the operations?
We're investigating that, as well as any other players in the
email, Slack. Signal.
It's billions of records. It's a very vibrant environment.
So I hear that you haven't discovered that. I mean, it would seem interesting that that they didn't either give legal advice or business advice or parental advice, maybe.
Well, certainly, clearly, and I think in our first day papers we indicated that. That Mr. Bankman had given legal advice.
Okay, had he been an employee of FTX, has it been reported?
I don't know if he actually had an employee status, but he certainly received payments from, the family did receive payments.
Okay, that sounds like employment to me. You got a payment for, okay. Well, I raise that because on December 8 of 2021, I met with Sam Bankman-Fried in my office, which I will note was just immediately before he came down to the hearing. He was at least 15 minutes late, and his father accompanied him in that meeting. I asked and focused on what types of regulation he was under, his engagement with regulators, and how that affected FTX. But it seems to me that there's a lot more to uncover here. Certainly, Mr. Bankman-Fried has let's say, wooed many in New York, Silicon Valley, around the world, and yes, certainly here in D.C. He was, they loved, everybody loved the exciting idea of a politically progressive, smart entrepreneur who was going to reimagine capitalism and change the world, feeling better about themselves, all while making them gobs of money. And I'm glad to see it's finally unraveled. So my time is up and I yield back.
Thank you.
That's all that matters.
The gentlewoman from Ohio, Mrs. Beatty, who is also the chair of the Subcommittee on Diversity and Inclusion, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
First of all, let me just say thank you to Chairwoman Waters and our ranking member, and certainly to you, Mr. Ray. We have heard a lot. A lot of this has been difficult to digest, primarily because of what has happened to so many people and so much money involved. Mr. Ray, you mentioned in your testimony that one of your primary goals is to limit to the greatest extent possible the harm suffered by FTX customers. Hundreds and hundreds of $millions have been removed from crypto wallets, and in its estimates that about 1 million people have money frozen in the exchange. Can you all the likely
Uh-oh, what's going on?
funds back? And if you can't answer
That's grandma's
that question,
webcam right there.
I have the information.
Ms. Beatty, would you repeat the question? You were interrupted for a minute or so there.
That's when
I am sorry.
when you give grandma
I am
webcam and
at
old
home
Wi-Fi.
recovering, so I hope. Sorry about any connection. Basically, hundreds of dollars have been removed from crypto wallets, and it's estimated that about 1 million people have money frozen in their exchange. Can you tell us how many users have lost money, and when will they get their money back?
Well, our process is such that, we are securing our assets every day. Every day we are out looking for wallets and the keys to those wallets to maximize the recovery of value. So that's an ongoing process. We've secured all the cash in the bank accounts to the extent that we can at this point. We've secured crypto assets. We're still in the process of doing that. Ultimately, that's a question of months. The litigation has been pointed out by other members. Certainly will take a longer time frame, but that is our number one focus is to generate value to repay those customers. I don't have a customer account for you today. We do know that there was 2.7 million users in the U.S. silo, which again overstates the customer relationships because people had multiple trading accounts. And in the .com silo, we had over 7.6 million users, again, overstating the actual customer relationships due to the multitude of accounts by any particular customer. So we need to get to the bottom of those customer numbers.
Thanks, Mr. Ray. Let me ask you this. Despite the fact that FTX told customers it would not trade customers' funds, we know now that FTX loaned out, I think, about $10 billion in customer assets for proprietary trading. Mr. Ray, do you know how it was possible for FTX to access clients' funds in violation of its own terms of service that read, without clients' permission, and exposes customers to such massive loss?
Well, as I indicated, there was no corporate controls, no corporate oversight, no independent board, and the owners of the business, the senior management, had virtual control of the accounts of each of the silos and could move money or assets, as they desired, undetected by customers. To the extent there were rules, and there were very few, obviously they were made to be broken.
So I think what I'm hearing you saying is that there was no one personally approved this. Let me ask you a last question. Can you tell us what regulatory changes could prevent the unauthorization or the unauthorizing customer funds in the future based on your wealth of experience?
Without speculating about what regulatory fix there could be, and I've said in my earlier testimony, the critical thing is segregation of customer funds and transparency.
Okay, and lastly, in your 5 points that you outlined, and I'm sorry if you said it before, is there
getting a little bored, I'm gonna be honest,
timetable
Joel.
that you think you can get to that? And that can be a yes or no? I think I'm getting close to my time.
There's no particular time frame, but it's as quickly as possible. In my experience with Enron,
And is that months? Is that weeks? Quickly as possible.
it certainly isn't weeks. It's definitely months, and the causes of action, could take longer. But we will marshal assets on a weekly basis and on a monthly basis, and we'll do that as quickly as possible.
Thank you so much for taking the time to try to help us out. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Barr, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Ray, in your declaration, you said that many of the companies in the FTX group did not have appropriate corporate governance and that this situation is unprecedented. You also, in your testimony today, said that the FTX collapse stems from the lack of an independent board and a complete failure of any internal controls or governance whatsoever. Can you elaborate in describing the governance structures for FTX.com that led you to make those comments?
Well, first and foremost, there's no independent board of directors. So one of the first things that I did was put on an independent board of directors led by our chairperson, who's the former U.S. attorney, and Honorable Joseph Farnan, the former U.S. District Court judge. So put in a corporate structure of independent directors, put in separate officers, the new officers of the company. I put in a new CFO, a new chief information officer, a new head of administration, all independent, with some background and experience in these sectors. None of the employees, there's a lot of titles in the company, but no experience to back it up.
Can you explain how the FTX.com governance structure differs from the governance structures of FTX US?
Virtually no difference. There was no structure.
Mr. Ray, in your work so far, have you examined the governance structure or the flow of assets to the FTX Foundation or its various affiliates, including FTX Community?
I'm going to do one more
FTX
guy after
Climate,
Mr. Barr here,
or the
and then I'm
Future
going to
Fund?
wrap it up if
We are
this doesn't get any more
We've
interesting.
not completed our
I'm kind of getting bored.
I
I'm
am
not gonna lie to y'all.
curious in your work whether or not you will determine whether those entities were established properly as non-profits or whether or not the funds received were improperly transferred customer accounts. Do you have any visibility into that yet?
We're looking at that right now. We've asked our folks at Ernst & Young to look at the tax side of it, and we're investigating the money transfers. So you can be sure we're going to dig into those details.
Was the FTX Foundation and those other not-for-profit, ostensibly not-for-profit entities, were they completely separate from any of the for-profit entities?
They were owned by Sam Bankman-Fried. I can't tell you that they were separate because they got funds from Alameda. So we know the source of their funding was from the FTX group. There was separate ownership, but not separate, funding.
So commingled assets in that case as well?
Absolutely.
Okay. At least one ESG ratings firm gave FTX a higher score for governance than ExxonMobil. Given your testimony that FTX's collapse stems from the absolute concentration of control in the hands of a very small group of grossly inexperienced and unsophisticated individuals who failed to implement virtually any of the systems or controls necessary for a company that is entrusted with other people's money or assets, what would you say about this ESG governance rating, which rated FTX higher than ExxonMobil?
I'd get my money back.
Can you identify which entities had audited financial statements?
Yes, I can. So there was no audit at Alameda, no audit at the venture silo. There was audit at the...
All right, I'm going to ask honestly, can somebody please explain to me what is the point of these ESG scores? I mean, if you invest in a company that has an environmental policy that you disagree with, you're not doing anything to help the company. If you take your money out of companies that don't have environmental, social, and governance scores or policies that you agree with, you're not doing anything to harm the company. Like selling your shares of a company because it doesn't have good environmental policies doesn't have any effect on the company's operations. Like, is this a religious thing? Is it what is the person's point of view when they say this company scores poorly on the social score because they don't have enough diversity, so I'm going to sell my shares? Like, what does that do to the company. Like, why would somebody choose to invest that way based on ESG scores? Like, even Merrill Lynch is giving me ESG scores as like one of the first things when I look at a new company. I don't understand why somebody would make their decision on investing based on ESG. Like, I don't get it. I would love to know somebody else's point of view on that.
U.S. silo, and also audit at the .com silo. I can't speak to the integrity or quality of those audits. We're reviewing, obviously, the books and records. And as I've said earlier, much of those books and records were maintained on fairly unsophisticated ledger workbooks.
And you testified of the lack of record keeping.
Yes.
And so there's a whole lot of financial statements that are either not audited or not available. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say.
In your declaration, you stated that you did not believe that those audited financial statements were reliable. Can you elaborate on why you believe that to be the case?
Well, we've lost $8 billion, right, of customer money. So by definition, I don't trust a single piece of paper in this organization.
Sam Bankman-Fried, in his testimony to this committee on December 8th of last year, said that FTX has designed and offered a platform with a market structure that is risk-reducing. To be sure, there are irresponsible actors in the digital asset industry, and those actors attract the headlines, but FTX is not one of them. Was that statement incorrect?
False, yes.
Thank you. And let me conclude by describing what is going on here by a popular crypto commentator. If you set up an exchange where you're the market maker, you're the issuer, you're the prime broker, and then you trade against your own customers, you have a vested interest in creating the assets, promoting the assets, and manipulating the price of the assets. What you have is a crypto casino. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from California, Mr. Vargas, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to begin.
All right, this is going to be the last one because I'm getting kind of bored of watching like old people talk to each other about things that they kind of understand a little bit or they got briefed on 20 minutes before the hearing. So I'm going to wrap it up after this next guy, but I want to thank everybody for tuning in.
Again, by thanking you once again for taking the lead to hold bad actors accountable and pursue transparency in the cryptocurrency space. And also, Mr. Ray, I want to thank you for being here today to testify. I think I start off a little bit like Paul Krugman does in the New York Times. I don't get the point. I really don't get the point of blockchain and cryptocurrency. It's like keeping track of how many times you chew gum, like who cares? There's other ways that are, I think, less fraudulent to make transactions. But anyway, that being said, how many times have we talked here about the potential for abuse, of fraud in the crypto market? Quite a bit. We've had a lot of cheerleading from some people, especially on the other side of the aisle. I don't hear it today. Haven't heard it yet, but I do want to hear it like we normally hear it, how wonderful it is and how they shouldn't be regulated by the SEC, that they're too tough on them. Imagine we're not going to hear that today, especially after what we saw with FTX. But we do want to see order and transparency in this industry and throughout the financial markets. If you are an issuer of cryptocurrency or a manager of cryptocurrency exchange, and you conduct business with U.S. customers, consider this FTX collapse as your public service announcement. Come into compliance with the Securities Act of 1933, the Securities Act of 1934, and all other applicable federal and state laws. Do not skirt the law, mishandle U.S. citizens' funds, and then claim innocence. For the cryptocurrency industry to continue, citizens need to be informed, regulators need to uphold the laws, and companies need to comply. Now that wasn't happening, was it, Mr. Ray, under this particular company?
No, sir.
Why wasn't it?
Again, you have control in a small group of individuals without any oversight whatsoever, from an independent board or experienced managers. It's just a recipe for problems.
What government entity is responsible for this fiasco?
That's not for me to say.
No, it is for you to say. You're right there, and I'm asking you. If you had to opine, that's why you're there in the hot seat. Who is it? Should the SEC have been more aggressive, even though we had a lot of our friends on the other side saying they shouldn't have been? Should the SEC have been more aggressive?
You know, I'm not experienced, and I'm not a regulatory lawyer. I'm not here to express views about who should.
That's going to be a wrap. We got a lot of people that don't really know what they're talking about, asking questions to somebody who's running a company that clearly just received investments from us, from the user. We put our money into FTX, and then FTX used that money to gamble, basically, and then kept a record of what kind of investment we made so that we would be credited if we want to withdraw. Well, once they gambled all of our money and lost, then it became apparent that they can't actually satisfy all the people who have deposited money into their accounts. It would be like if we brought all of our money to the bank, they loaned it out to themselves, made bad loans, and then they didn't have enough money when people went to come to withdraw. This is a classic bank run situation. The fact that Sam and his people over at Alameda claimed that they had these ways of making money by trading crypto, this Japanese arbitrage, going from Japan to Korea to get the kimchi premium and all that, that ended up all being false. They barely ever made any money off that. And when they did make money off of that, they ended up gambling it on shitcoins and lost all the money. So as we continued to deposit, they continued gambling, and they didn't have enough money to satisfy our withdrawals based on what we had already deposited. So all that stuff about giving us interest and stuff like that, that was just a way to get us to deposit more money. That was it. So I wonder how long the amount of money that they had, that FTX had, would have been unable to satisfy our deposits. Like, are we talking about ever since mid-2020, they were already losing so much money with their crypto shit trading that they could have suffered a bank run then if we all tried to withdraw? Or was this something that happened in mid-2022 that all of a sudden they wouldn't have had enough money and they couldn't handle a bank run? So I don't know. I don't know when that would have happened. I would love to know how long this has been going on, that they couldn't satisfy our own withdrawal requests. But I was lucky. I was able to withdraw my money within 24 hours of them shutting down. I got in. I was probably one of the last people to have my money withdrawn, but I did lose $5,500 on BlockFi, which was affiliated with FTX. They just declared bankruptcy, I think, like 2 weeks ago. So it's been a shit show. I don't think we're ever going to get our money back, ever. But, maybe we'll get 10% of it back in 10 years. By then, who knows what's going to happen. So, all right, thank you, everybody, for tuning in. It was fun for a little bit, and then I got bored of watching old people talk to each other. But I'm going to be making some new content this week, so I'll see you guys in the comment section of the next video.